mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to the PASS Database Administration Virtual Chapter meeting. Today our topic is PowerShell for the DBA, Part 2, Objects and Tools. Our speaker today is David Cobb. I'm Julie Blomquist, one of the moderators for the VC chapter, and our sponsor is Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Hewlett-Packard, with their sponsorship, does allow us to have a $50 gift certificate raffle, which occurs after the meeting with those who are in attendees. PASS officially launched their new websites and their new look. PASS has a large number of virtual chapters. If you have a physical chapter in your group, you're more than welcome to still attend virtual chapters. And when you sign up with your PASS account to get notifications, you only get emails on when the meetings are going to be occurring and what the topics are. The advantage of attending in person is you are able to answer questions. All of the virtual chapters do record their presentations and post them on their websites. SQL Saturdays are a one-day mini conference. They're held all around the world. There's a nominal registration fee, usually just to cover the lunch. Here are the ones which are coming up. So you can join a personal chapter, a virtual chapter. There's a lot of networking and opportunities to present as well as attend and network. If you're interested in volunteering with PASS, you can send emails in or look at the your PASS profile and put information in. And we have an Outstanding Volunteer Award, which you could email if you think someone should be recognized. We really want to thank the people who discovered us on YouTube, but please visit thesequelpass.org and become a member. Here are the different ways to stay connected with PASS. And today, like I said, it's PowerShell for the DBA Part 2, Objects and Tools. We have once again David Cobb. David loves to learn and solve problems with technologies and teach others to do the same. He's a system architect for CheckAlt Payment Solutions provider. They're providers of an automated and electronic check transaction processing since 2005. He's a Microsoft certified trainer, training people on SQL Server and other Windows technologies since 2002. He's also a principal consultant for Cobb Information Technologies, Inc., founded in '96, providing technology consulting with a focus on SQL Server-backed applications and automation. He has served as a technical reviewer for SQL Server and PowerShell books, including SQL Server 2014 with PowerShell version 5, Pro PowerShell for Microsoft Azure, and Hyper-V for VM administrators. Besides playing with technology, David enjoys traveling and exploring local parks with his family in around Boca Raton, Florida. Thank you, David. I'm going to change presenters and pass it over to you. And like I said, this is being recorded and will be posted.
Very good. Thank you so much. And yeah, let's get started. So this presentation, we're diving right into some PowerShell code. I'm not going to show you any slides. Information here on this first script to get in touch with me. If you have any questions, I would love to hear from anyone that has attended. So this is part 2. In the first part of this presentation, we spent a lot of time on the PowerShell basics, just getting started, finding your way around PowerShell. And for this presentation, I'm going to assume that you have the basics figured out and that you're ready to start exploring what you can do inside of SQL Server. So we're going to look at the state of the current tool set with PowerShell 5.1 and SQL Management Studio 2016. We're going to look at the PowerShell modules, SQL PS, SQL Server, and also the community tools that are available. So we will spend some time on the SQL Server management objects that we can access from PowerShell as well. So just to get started here, you're looking at my ISE, my integrated scripting environment, and I'm using this ISE steroid. So if you notice extra buttons or extra windows here, that's what's happening. And I'm also using Variable Explorer. We'll look at this later. That's this tab over on the right that lets me inspect variables. And this ISE steroids does have a cost, but the Variable Explorer is free. I'd like to try this out. So right now I am running in version 5.1 of PowerShell, and you don't have to be using the latest version to apply most of these things. Usually there's another way to accomplish those tasks. I do recommend getting the latest version at least on your workstation, even if you can't install it on all your servers. And we are going to start with working with the Cps Powershell Module. So this is what I'll call the old PowerShell module. CPS has been around. They actually included it. There was a version for 2008, but really in SQL 2012, we found that this was being used more as a core component of SQL Server. And I've used the verbose command here to see all that happens when I import the CPS module. So when you use verbose, you get a lot of extra information. Sometimes it's information overload, but a lot of times it helps you understand what's going on under the covers. And I can see that because I've used verbose, I can see the various modules and where they're located. And the assemblies that get pulled in as well, SMR extended, SQL WMI management. So we're able to see under the covers what actually happens to my session when I use this verbose command. So let's go to So now that I've imported that module, I want to point out that if you're like me, you may be running more than one version of SQL Server, and each version has its own SQL PS. You want to make sure that you're using the latest one. This is the version for SQL 2016. It's in the under Microsoft SQL Server 1.3.0 folder. So 2012 would have been the 1.2 folder and so forth. So just be aware of what version you're actually using. And I'm able to check that by looking at this module, the module base property of the module. So I can also use get command with this module and capture all of the commands that are available to me. And I'll tell you right off the bat, if you're going to look at this and say, hey, I want to understand this right away, I wouldn't necessarily dive into trying to understand what all of these commands do. A lot of them are for specific situations, dealing with high availability disaster recovery or always on, availability groups, configuring the SQL firewall. These may not be things you need to do. Some things that you might find are useful, things like starting and stopping your SQL instances, being able to restore and back up SQL databases. These are good places to start when you're trying to look at what's available in the CPS module. And of course, invoke SQL command. If I want to run a SQL statement from within PowerShell, invoke SQL command. You'll find me using that very often. So this actually has a total of 49 commands, this module. Okay. And I'm using the measure objects just to count them. But I'd like to show you the new and improved SQL Server module. And what has happened is with SQL 2016, they've changed the game a little bit. They've decided to release that SQL engine separately from Management Studio and to give them some more flexibility into what to release and when. So our new work in PowerShell with SQL. It's going to show up in the SQL Server module as opposed to SQL PS. If I want to import this now, because I already have SQL PS installed, there's going to be conflicts that overlap. And to correct that problem, I first need to remove this SQL PS module from my session. And then I can import the SQL Server module. So again, I can look at the properties here. I'm going to look at this module, and I'm going to look for a property here called module base. And you'll notice that this is stored somewhere different. You'll see the SQL Server module will be under the Program Files Windows PowerShell directory, where other modules are typically installed, not related to SQL Server. So that's different going forward. So they kind of picked a different lane to work with in SQL for PowerShell going forward. So you want to be aware of that. Now, what's interesting, that even though we've released something new, and at this point, as we look at the commands that we have available, they're pretty much the same at this moment. We still have about the same number of commands. This is changing. They have started to work on several new commands, and you're going to see these being released in the next version of SQL Server. So if I actually compare the two different sets of commands with this compare object, it's the same thing. I see the same objects on both sides. So nothing much exciting to show you there, but what I do want to show you is what's happening on a special Trello board. This is the Trello board for PowerShell and the SQL client tools. And Microsoft is doing something very different. I think this is wonderful. So they have decided to explore using these Trello boards to let people see what they're working on, let people make suggestions and vote up on the suggestions that they would like, so that they know that they're working on the things that the community thinks are important to them. So I'll leave a link here in the notes and refer to this at the end of the presentation as well. But I encourage you to look at this and see what might be interesting to you. Bring your suggestions, vote up suggestions you think are good. There's a wins Trello column that shows the things that they've already added, and these are going to come out in the next version of SQL. Things like read SQL table data, add SQL logging. Very useful stuff that's just not there yet. So by keeping an eye on this and participating, you can influence the next version of SQL Server.
Hey, David, we have a couple of questions. First, can they use the SQL PS for 2016 to access a SQL Server 2008?
Yeah, that's a good question. So under the covers, we're still, when we use PowerShell, we're still connecting to either the SQL Server database itself or to WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation, and there's backwards compatibility. You can be running commands on SQL 2016 and even talk to a SQL 2000 database. Some of the commands you might not see all the properties you expect. Commands that depend on newer features won't work. But there's a lot of thought put into the backward compatibility for these commands. So that's one of the reasons I suggest if you have this running on your workstation, very commonly most environments don't have everybody using SQL 2016 in their production environments. But you can have SQL Management Studio 2016 on your workstation, that PowerShell 5 on your workstation, and be able to take advantage of a lot of that functionality against earlier versions of SQL. Any other questions?
Sorry, yes, what's the difference between the SQL PS versus the SQL Server modules?
So think of it as kind of changing lanes and starting to develop things a different way. some of the challenges that they run into with SQL PS is that it's tightly coupled to the server, to Management Studio. You might recall if you started working with SQL PS early on, it would, when you ran it, it would change the console's current location. It would change you into the SQL Server directory. When you ran it, you would run it from SQL Server, you get one result. If you ran it inside of PowerShell with SQL PS, you get a different result. And they just found, I think, that a better approach would be to split it out and do things separately. But by doing that, they would be breaking a lot of existing functionality. So they decided to leave SQL PS where it is, but introduce SQL Server module in this new fashion. It's located differently. Right now, the functionality is pretty much the same, but the new functionality going forward is going to show up in this SQL Server module. At this point, the functionality-wise are not very different, but we're going to see more releases of SQL Server come out more frequently with the SQL Server module, because they'll be able to release these with each new edition of SQL Server Management Studio. So they're taking a different approach to release, and hopefully what that means for us is that our legacy code doesn't break, but we get to see new features more. Okay, great. Any other questions? Continue on here.
No, that's it for now. If you want to just speak a little louder, because your voice is a little low. Some people have commented on that.
Okay. We were having some audio challenges earlier, so let's see if I can keep the volume. Julie, let me know if this is okay.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, very good. So let's have a look at the most interesting, I think, if you look at where you want to start, if you want to understand how do I get started with understanding the SQL Server module, you could do worse than looking at the PowerShell provider or PS provider. So PS provider, PowerShell provider, is PowerShell's way of exposing different resources of the servers or the applications that you're working in into a common structure, similar to the file system. So when we work with the file system, we have folders. Those folders contain items. Those items can have properties. And we'll do things like changing directory, creating folders, creating items. And that structure, that approach, works to the registry as well. I can navigate the registry, looking at different hives within the registry, looking at different keys, looking at the values of the keys. There's a provider for the registry. There's a provider for the file system. And we have these other providers listed as well with Get PS Provider. And we're going to look at the SQL Server provider. And it actually exposes our SQL Server as though it were a drive that we can navigate. So if I set my location, which is a lot like, it's basically the same as changing directory or CD for folks that are familiar with DOS. Now look at my prompt. Now I'm in the SQL Server directory. And if I do get child item, which is the same as dir, I can see the contents of my SQL Server. So I can access and work with DAC, data collection, policy management, integration services, extended events. Okay? These are all accessible to PowerShell through this provider. Of course, the thing that's most interesting to us is the actual SQL Server database engine. We're going to spend time there. But you can find PowerShell utilities and scripts to work with all these aspects of SQL because they're exposed to PowerShell through this provider. So I'm going to set location, and this path means something. Within the SQL Server, in the SQL database engine, here's the name of my server. And when I get child item, I see the instances available. I actually have a default instance running SQL 2014 and SQL Server 2016 as well. And I can navigate by changing directory or setting location. And I can navigate with an absolute path or with a local path, just the same way I could with a command prompt. So within the default instance on my server, the default instance on my server, the SQL Database Engine, here are the various items that I can deal with. I want to work with availability groups, audits, endpoints, databases, jobs, roles, the mail server. Again, these are all exposed to the provider, so I can access and work with all these things in PowerShell. So how do I look at what's in here? Let's actually focus in on the databases. So I'm going to go into the databases, and I will have a list of databases, but at this point, I see within the AdventureWorks database, so in the AdventureWorks database, I can access all of these objects within that database. Roles, rules, schemas, text catalogs, encryption, certificates. It's all accessible to me through the provider. Let's pick something we're all familiar with. Let's go look at some tables. And if I go and get the child item, think of it as doing a directory. Look in the tables folder. What do I see in the tables folder? Well, I see all of these tables in the tables folder. And I get to see the schema, the name of the object, and so forth. So let's drill down into one particular table, and then I could look at the employee table. Again, a set of properties I could access. If I want to look at the columns of the table, the Human Resources Employee table, here are my various columns. I could keep drilling down, stop there as far as looking at what we can see within the table. So now I can list it here, but how do I actually deal with that table? How do I actually do things with that table? So maybe I want to see the definition. I want to add records, or I want to script the table. How do I actually work with it? So I need to access the object that it represents. You are aware that anything in the database, whether it's a table, view, store procedure, login, these are all objects. So I'm going to use the get item commandlet to get the object that's specified by this path. And now the table object itself is available to me. And we'll pass it to get member. That's the command that we use to inspect variables, to inspect objects, to learn more about them. So a lot of information here. Let's scroll up to the top before we talk about it. So our type name, and I don't know why it's up there, our type name is Microsoft SQL Server Management SMO table. So this type is the class that this is instantiated from. I can go look up the documentation for this type of object and understand how to work with it. Notice it's an SMO. So these are our SQL management objects. So the table is a great place to start. And if I can come out and look at our online documentation on MSDN, I can come and find out all about that object. There's way more functionality here than we would ever be able to talk to in a day, let alone a few minutes. So you'll start by finding out what that object is that you want to work with, creating a variable against that object, and then you can refer to the documentation. Documentation is excellent, just like for SQL. Books Online, the documentation for SQL management objects is great. So as I explore this object, I can see the various methods, and you'll recognize these methods from your experience working with T-SQL as a DBA. So I want to disable indexes. I want to alter the table. I want to drop the table. Okay. There's methods for all of these, so I can see all the various methods that are defined, and then the properties as well. Things like the columns is available to me, or events, file groups. Okay, so I can access the object through its various methods. So I have a rebuild method. So if I want to be able to rebuild the indexes on my table for PowerShell, it's just that simple to use that. And again, I'm just using the same approach. I'm going to locate that object, put it in a variable, and then inspect it with getMember to understand it, and then experiment with the various properties that it contains. Later on, we'll look at ways to use other people's tools. There are folks that have gone and done this. They've gone ahead and explored this and figured out how to accomplish a particular task that a DBA would want to do with PowerShell, and we can learn from their work, and we'll talk about that here shortly. So a different tack we'll take, besides looking at tables, okay, we can also work with the SQL agent. Jobs, alerts, categories, those will be familiar to a DBA. I can look at the jobs. Okay. And under job server, I have a jobs folder, and I have various jobs that are created, and I can access those here. If I want to grab one of these jobs and work with it, here I'm going to use getChildItem. But instead of grabbing all of the jobs, I'm going to specify the job whose property name is equivalent or equal to the test job. So now when I run this command, I've stored that object in the job variable. So let me take advantage of the variable explorer here. So we can look at getMember, but I want to point out this free add-on for ISE, the variable explorer. I'm going to click on the triangle here next to job, and now I can explore everything I can do against this job object. So I can find out what category it's in, last run outcome, let's get next run date, all the properties that I might find by querying MSDB or by looking into Job Activity Monitor. I can access those here. So if we look at the various members, methods rather, I will see things that I can recognize: start and stop, rename. Let's actually use the script method. It's a very simple job. I'm going to call the script method on the job object. And then here's the script to recreate that job. Okay, let's do it just selecting the version, but once made that script function is there, then I can access and work with these jobs. So just a couple simple examples there. So any questions about these things so far?
Let's see. So the questions I have is, how efficient is it while working with remote servers?
Okay. So you'll either connect to the remote server via, if you're talking to the objects, the single management objects, you might be interfacing on the other side with WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation, or you may have some commands where you're connecting to the SQL database directly. So it's kind of a function of the network throughput that you have to that server and the kind of work that you're doing. A little similar to if you want a query that says select star from 1 million records, no matter how efficient your network is, it can still take a long time to complete. But my experience with this so far has been that it's very snappy to be able to connect and make those connections. A lot of times, as I've become more familiar, it's easier for me to do this than it is to remote desktop to that machine and run a command. Or maybe I connect to it with Management Studio, things that I would changes with T-SQL. Ultimately, that's probably going to be faster. If you have a way to do it in T-SQL, it's usually going to be a faster way because you've already connected. You've already gone through the trouble to connect to the server. Each case is going to be different. In general, my experience with it has been it's been very efficient. I've had scenarios where I update 4 or 5 servers with the same command, and comes back in under 2 seconds, and that's connecting, making the change, disconnecting, going on to the next server. So you'll have to test to really know for sure as far as the efficiency goes. Ultimately, all you're doing is you're talking across the network, you're interfacing with the SQL server like you would from Management Studio, and you're interacting with the same objects that Management Studio is talking to. And now you have code level, code that's doing it instead of the graphic interface.
Let's see, how can you modify a table once you have a method initiated? An example is add or drop a column that is just a method on the object.
That's exactly right. So if I looked at this object here, if I look at the table object, there's going to be an alter statement that I can use, and I can drill into, or maybe I go into the columns, and then within that columns object, find a method there. I would do a simple Google search to report too. A lot of times the things that you want to do, if I go Google search SQL add column, then I'll find a T-SQL solution for that. But if I look for PowerShell SQL add column, you'll find somebody who's written a script that lays that out for you and shows you the representation. So I would imagine I'm going to have to access the columns object, and within there be able to access probably a new method and be able to pass the parameters to it, the name, the data type, and so forth, and then I would get my column. But I will save, I can look that up at the end if you'd like. I think I have a script for that actually. But it involves exploring that object, finding the piece that you want to work with, and looking at the methods that it exposes, and working with those methods.
Also, can you show how you open Variable Explorer?
I will say go and find this Variable Explorer. This is a module that you'll need to download, and you include it. It has a set of instructions with it. I believe, it's not a bit of a tangent, but if I profile, I'm loading it, and I think I have just just importing the module now that it's been downloaded, and at that point that shows up, and you can turn it on and off here. You have Variable Explorer, I believe, is one of the things you can turn on and off. There it is. So it's one of the add-ons. Turn on and off. I highly recommend it. If you're learning and everything is an object, and what's in this object, it's a great way to explore the things that you're working with.
That's all for now.
Okay. So let's look at another type of object. I have a server. Maybe I'm not sure what instances of SQL are running on that server, but I know the host name of the server. So in this case, I'm going to be looking at my localhost object, or localhost server rather, and then I'm going to create a managed computer object. So I'm going to use SMO. This is a WMI managed computer object. So when I run this, now managed computer has within it a collection of server instances. So I can see my default instance, it's named SQL Server, and I can see my SQL 2016 named instance as well. So It's a little ugly when you look at these properties, collections of properties. I see each property or its value here. Maybe I don't want to see all of that. So I can pipe that to select. So I'm just going to get the name and the resource name here so I can see just the columns I'm interested in. So the managed computer object, just like everything else, I can come in and look in the hierarchy under SMO, WMI. I have the managed computer object. So I see all the various properties that are exposed. Okay, so I'm looking at the name and the resource name as well, URN. And I can see the various methods that I would work against to interact with those. So it's a good way to be able to discover, hey, what SQL Server instances, what SQL Server instances are out there, as well as what SQL Server instances I'm aware of on a server. This will help you find everything that's there. So that's the managed computer object. And unless there's any questions, I'll keep going. Let's have a look at the server object. This was arguably one of the most useful. This is a representation of the SQL Server instance. So again, I'm going to look at my local host. I'm going to create a new object, this type, management SMO server. I'm passing in the name of the server, and then I'm inspecting it with get member. So here are the various properties that are available to me. So the name of the server, what platform, what version, major or minor, user options, and so forth. Let's find that over here. So I can see, and you'll recognize a lot of these values if you're working with SQL Server. This would be a good way to go out and check the versions, check where my database directories are, find out what versions installed, if I had the latest patch installed. I can inspect all the properties of that server, how much memory, processors, and so forth. A lot of properties here. So that are available to me on the server. I can do things like alter, attach a database, deny access, detach database, enumerate relations, collections, error logs, locks, a ton of methods. Some of these I'll recognize as a DBA. Some of these I might not understand what that means. Again, I'm just going to go back to the documentation for what is the server? What is the server? What are these methods? Again, it's all well documented, and I can come in and learn about what these properties are, what these methods do. And let's just look at a few examples. So I have a script method, and the script method will script out a SQL script that recreates all the registry entries that are set up on this machine. I have a read error log method that would show me the most recent error log. So I can access this information if I need to search for a particular error or whether a backup is completed. I have this available to me as well. If I just want to look at all of those properties in the easier to read format, I can use the get property set. And let's get this here. So this shows me all the various properties and their values. So I can select from this, filter for what I'm looking for to see the configurations of my server. So again, I'm using the object, instantiating that object, inspecting that object, and what's possible, what can I do, what are the methods that I can work with within that object. And then I'm experimenting with those methods. So if you'll take on PowerShell and SQL from this way and just explore it, you can find your way into working with PowerShell and SQL. And a lot of people do that. There's the documentation is there. There's excellent resources. And I've, on our first presentation, and we'll share the links for all this when we're over with, but PowerShell and SQL resources online as far as how do I build stuff, how do I create these things. There's a lot of great resources out there. And I want to show you some of the tools that you should consider. Any questions so far?
Is this also designed keeping in mind that SQL Server is on Unix?
That's a great question. I've been just seeing the bloggers and some of the folks that have got their hands on and play with it. It's very interesting how they've architected that. I haven't played with it yet. But a lot of the functionality, some of it comes from connecting to, if it comes from connecting to the database itself and getting back the results and making a query. I'm opening up a connection just as I would on Windows, so that should be transparent. But I actually don't know how this will come out on things that rely on these management objects. So these DLLs that we're working against, server, DLL under the SMO namespace, the jobs, these objects, I'm not sure how those will be accessed. So that's a good question. I'm going to have to go research that. I haven't had a chance to play with it very much. I know that they're implementing PowerShell, a subset of PowerShell that's going to work in Linux. And I know that they've got a version of Bash working on Windows. But I'm not sure how much of that's all being implemented. Okay.
And there's just one, it was, if you could show the URL for the PowerShell resources, he missed the note.
Oh, I'm going to share all of that. So what we'll do at the end, this is just, last time we sent out a link. It was a bit.ly link. So this is actually my blog, but I'm going to give the same information. They'll be able to put links on the MBA site as well.
Sounds good.
Yeah, you can get that link as well. My blog, I'm not using it nearly enough. I need to blog more. But if I hear from anybody, it's going to encourage me to put more useful stuff out there. So let's have a look at how you can find the resources. You're starting from square one. Why wouldn't you look out in the community and find tools that people have already built? PowerShell is a tool-making environment. You can create your own commands, your own functions, your own modules to do work that people need to do with PowerShell. And that is, in my opinion, one of the best features of PowerShell. I don't want to have to figure out something that somebody else already figured out. If they already have a great script to create objects, to do backups and restores, I want to use that battle-proven script as opposed to creating it myself. So I'm really kind of, I think if I pick one feature about PowerShell 5 that's my favorite, it would be this PowerShell Get, which is a subset of the package management modules. It lets you go out and explore and find and install automatically, if you'd like, the scripts or modules that'll help you do your work. Okay. So PowerShell Get is part of PowerShell 5. I believe you can get it and set it up in earlier versions. It comes with PowerShell 5. And any of these things that I'm going to show you, you can also go download them manually. So there's a PowerShell gallery you can visit, and has scripts for SQL for every aspect of dealing with PowerShell. Somebody's written a script or a module, you can find it there. But it's public code, so you're putting your trust in that person that wrote it. There are some protections, things like SSL, some code signing that they can do, but ultimately you're responsible for what you use. So when you're using PowerShell Gallery, you can inspect that code and understand what it's doing before you run it. So I'm going to have a look at this PowerShell Get module. So this has a set of commands that let me go out and find commands, modules, scripts. Even DSC, desired state configuration resources, are going to be explorable, discoverable through PowerShell Get. And I would like to use the find module command. So if I run this, it'll actually take several seconds to go out and look at all the modules that are available. And if I add this SQL filter, it's going to limit it to just SQL that's contained in the name of the description. So I've actually run this find module, and here I'm going to select the name and the description, and I'm going to show it to us in a table here. So here are a few pages of useful modules that are out there to work against SQL Server. So that's SQL PS, that's a DSC resource for setting up SQL. We have PS Common SQL, Azure RM SQL if you're setting up SQL servers in Azure, if you're working against MySQL, or SQL Server in DSC and desired state configuration. Those are useful. Okay. It's interesting that it's right here near the top. I believe if you're going to look at one module that you go and explore, you're going to have a look at this DBA tools module. It's a really neat tool. So we could find modules. We can also find scripts. Again, I can add my own filter. And again, I've already run this, so I'll just look at the result. Somebody has put out a script to back up SQL Azure database. Somebody's put out a script to show me the databases. Test all the Hallinger backups. Open my SQL query, get the SQL instances ports. So you may have a need, you find the script, and save yourself the time to write that and figure it out yourself. So this is all explorable. Again, if you don't have PowerShell Get, you can go to PowerShellGallery.com and just do searches to their website to find these. But since I do have it, I am able to get DBA tools and install it with one line of code. Install module, and I give it the name of the tool that I'm interested in. Oops. And I've added verbose here, and I like verbose on new commands, and I encourage you to do this. I can see that PowerShell Get is using the package provider NuGet. This is all built on top of NuGet. If you know any developers that are working with Visual Studio, they're using NuGet to download packages for their applications. And we're building this on top of that. So the NuGet is the tool that lets people publish packages and lets us go out and download and access those packages. So I've already got it installed, so it's showing me it's skipping the installation. And that's really all I need to do to install a new module. So if I look at get command here with this DBA tools module, let's kind of look back over at the web page. So at dbatools.io, this is the functions that they've included. And if you were like me, when you looked at the original SQL PS or the original SQL Server modules, hey, where's the function to do this? How do I do that? How can I accomplish the task that I want to do? And there's room for functionality that they have not yet provided, and I see a lot of that functionality in a tool like this. You have a lot of functionality around migration. So if you need to copy a SQL installation from one server to the other, there's a lot of commands built around migration. So copy SQL Server, copy SQL credentials or logins, data collection, every aspect of SQL that you need to migrate. They've got tools for that. If you have ever been locked out of a SQL server, you need to reset the SQL account. Okay? There's a reset SQL admin function that will stop the service and start it in single user mode, and then you connect and assign a password or create a login and grant it system input. It's a great tool. So I highly recommend you explore this first. There's some really neat things. Let's just give a quick preview of some of these. Naming a server. A lot of times you have scenarios where you may have renamed a SQL server and functions stop working. Test DBA server name goes in and checks. Looks at your SPN, looks at the host name, make sure that you don't need to rename your SQL server. I can test my SQL network latency, average milliseconds to connect, real simple command to test latency. I wish I knew that about that 2 years ago. I don't think it existed 2 years ago. But great simple tool. Virtual log files. As I back up and restore, or as I back up a database that's growing constantly, I can get an increased number of log files. So go and tell me how many virtual log files, rather, how many sections of virtual log files within my log files that can slow down my logging and slow down my recovery. So great simple utilities. Get DBA free space. Here I'm going to pass it a list. Here's a list of the instances that I have. I'm going to pipe this to get DBA free space, and then I'm going to select the properties of the result that I would like and format that in a table. Okay. So I see all my instances, all my database servers, their individual file names, the data file, the log files, and the sizes for each, as well as the percent used. So I have, let me spell this one. I just want to get everything. I just want to get DBA free space by itself. Notice here I'm running it by itself, and I did not supply a parameter, so I'm going to go ahead and type it in, get a prompt for it. And now I can see, use space MD. So it gives me for each one the file size, location, and so forth. So powerful, useful tools. If I want to copy login from one server to another, this happens all the time. As I'm migrating, I have login on one server and I need on the other server. I can do copy login. So this will actually take a parameter, or if I give it no parameters, I try to copy all the logins. And notice I've used what if. If you only get one thing out of this presentation, when you're working with SQL Server, and you're working with PowerShell, use what if. That tells you, hey, here's what I would have done if I had run this. So it tells me that it would be adding certain logins, built-in administrators, report user, and it will tell me which things it would skip. It's skipping ones that already exist. It's skipping ones that are related to the local machine. So I can understand how this works without actually making a change in the server with what if. And finally, copy SQL database. So here I can specify all databases, or a particular database. I can specify whether I want to do detach or attach, if I want to use backup and restore. It's a very flexible script. I can actually show you show commands. Copy show commands. Pop up the command dialog here. If I need to migrate databases, here's the different parameter sets, the different ways I can do it. If I want to use all databases, use the same folder structure. Go to my source destination, I can supply credentials if I need to. I use backups to do the restore. Or instead of detach and attach, I like to do backups. So lots of great functionality here. Again, if I run this command, again with what if, it tells me what it would do. So just a little preview there, that's possible. So much more to go over. This time I tried to end a few minutes early. I want to bring up and I'll share the link. It'll be a bit.ly link. You can spend 20 minutes looking at some of these resources here. I'll email these to share some with the group. I'm happy to answer any questions. Any questions you guys have, please feel free to contact us. And, Julie, what questions have we got? We've got a few minutes left.
I'm taking a look. So the link is going to have these PowerShell scripts as well?
Yes, I'd be able to share all these as well.
Okay.
Can't encourage you enough to play with people's scripts. So many good resources out there. Time for it, but I'll reference this in my links. SQL PowerDoc if you want to document your SQL or Windows servers. It's a PowerShell module that gathers a ton of information on your SQL servers. There's stuff out there, and we'll get to all those. I think, what else was, what other questions we have?
Really quite a few people are saying that was really awesome, you know, what you could do with the PowerShell. But I don't see any other questions. This was being recorded and it will be posted on the DBA Virtual Chapter website on the archive page. So David, thank you for your time. Quite a few people are just commenting about how it was a very good session.
Excellent. Please email us if you guys have questions. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching today.